Hi again guys, and welcome to another installment of Beards and Cars, and as of last week I can now finally say that this is not a podcast style series, but it is a podcast series because if you click one of the links down in the video description, which will be in every episode from here on out, you can actually go over to the official page on SoundCloud for this channel and download it as a podcast audio-only version. Now, one of the things I'm going to say about that is that for now, especially as a smaller channel, the video side of this series is still far more beneficial to the growth of this channel. For a number of reasons. The views, the likes, the comments, the ads, it's just better in every way so far. But for those who do want the audio version, I will be making it available probably about 5 or 6 hours after the video version. So for instance, you could listen to it at the end of Saturday or on a Sunday. Depends on your time zone, of course, but for now at least the video version, it helps me out a lot more than the SoundCloud version does. And of course, if I get like a sponsor or something in future, that'll change. But for now, it's purely for those who just want the audio experience. But with that to one side, what is the purpose of this installment? Well, as you saw from the title and from the thumbnail, it's a little bit different to like a Gran Turismo discussion or a Forza discussion, and yet it does have some very specific ties into those games at the same time. And it is vehicles that your thoughts, your opinions, or your feelings have actually changed about over time. Maybe it's something that you used to dislike that now you love. Maybe it's something that you used to think was the best thing out there and now you don't particularly care for it. And I've actually narrowed it down to 6 for me personally. And I've got 4 which were a positive change, and then 2 which were not so much a negative change but just kind of a drop off for me. So we'll go into the positive side first, and you can probably guess at least 1 or 2 of these if you've been around on the channel for quite a while. And again, if you've watched the HSG Top 50 series, you'll know that my taste in vehicles, not just cars but bikes as well, is pretty eclectic. It's all over the place, and that's one of the things that I love about those vehicles. You know, variety is the spice of life, as they say, and you can certainly say that about cars and bikes. So the first one for me, very obvious choice, a car which when I first saw it, and for quite a while I think I just wasn't a fan of at all, the Ferrari FF. Now, for those who don't know, the FF is actually now my dream car and my favourite car. So what a change that was. Initially, I did not like the way it looked. I thought it had a dumb grin on its face. It looked very big, disproportionately big almost. It was this big, heavy, seemingly weird choice of Ferrari. And although I'm not a Ferrari fan, generally speaking, there are plenty of Ferraris that I either respect or really like. The California, for instance, or the 599, or the Enzo, there are a number of great ones. However, the FF just seemed so different to everything else that initially it kind of threw me off. And I can still understand why a lot of people would seem that way, or would not seem that way, but think that way about the car. And also the GT C4 Lusso, the successor, if you will, to that vehicle. But for me with the FF, the reason I think why it grew on me so much over time is because I am a sucker for practical performance cars. It's one of the reasons why some of my favourite vehicles include the FF, the Aston Rapide, the Spiker D8 concept, these vehicles that are really powerful, really fast, true exotic supercars more often than not, but at the same time are genuinely usable and practical in daily life. The Ferrari, for instance, it's got 4 seats, tons of trunk space, it's comfortable, it's spacious, it's big enough for a person like me to have plenty of space in there, but at the same time you've got all-wheel drive, which is great in adverse weather conditions. Something which you would not usually want to take a Ferrari out in. It's just this perfect blend of everything that Ferrari was already doing well, you know, the looks, the sound, the performance, but then combining that with stuff which they never usually do, the practicality, the seats, the trunk space. And I love that. To me, it's a perfect melding of all of Ferrari's strengths, combined with strengths that they'd maybe never even tried to have before. I love the vehicle. It's definitely the one that stands out the most for me on this list. The next positive one for me is another one which I think is probably fairly obvious to many people who have heard my thoughts about it way back in the day compared to now, to the point where this is actually my dream hypercar, and that is the SSC Ultimate Aero. Now, for me, the SSC Ultimate Aero wasn't so much a car that I thought was dumb or ugly or anything like that. It just seemed lazy to me when I first saw the design of the car in particular, which, as you can tell, is a very important aspect of my love for a vehicle, as I mentioned about the Ferrari and about this one as well. It looked to me like it didn't put any effort in. It looked like it was just a straight-up copy of a Lamborghini Diablo, which had no effort. It looked kind of glitzy with the chrome wheels and the very chrome-esque headlights, the kind of gimmicky two-tone paint, but not in a Maserati MC12 kind of way, more in a Fast and Furious kind of way, or Pimp My Ride, and I just didn't like it. It immediately gave off a bad vibe to me. It looked like one of those get-rich-quick style supercars, where it was built with, GM parts bin special stuff, and just charge a six-figure markup. I couldn't have been further from the truth, because the Ultimate Aero is such a deeply impressive hypercar. And one of the things that people do not give it credit for is, yes, we all know it set the top speed record and it was later beaten, blah, 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 blah. That's all well and good, but at the end of the day, the most impressive thing about the Ultimate Aero is not the top speed. It's the acceleration. Not from 0 to 60, but from 0 to 200. In fact, as far as I can recall, and I actually relatively recently double-checked all the specs of these to compare them, the SSC Ultimate Aero is still something like the second or third fastest accelerating production street car of all time. It's like second or third only to the Hennessy Venom GT or something. It's faster than the Veyron Super Sport, even the Chiron is like 3.5 seconds slower to 200, something like that, and it's got way more power, way more development put into it, and it's a much newer vehicle, and yet the Ultimate Aero is just this absolute sledgehammer of a hypercar. And as I've mentioned on the channel before, I think I even talked about this in my HSG Top 50 episode featuring it, it is, I would say, the actual worthy successor to the TVR Speed 12, and yet it doesn't have the respect and the fandom that the TVR does. If you consider them side by side, the Ultimate Aero is to the Veyron what the Speed 12 was to the McLaren F1, the far more blunt seeming object to the much more scalpel-esque McLaren or Bugatti. But the reality is, the Speed 12 was not a blunt object. It was a very clever, very powerful, very deliberately built, motorsport-intended hypercar that just never got the chance to fully shine. Then, on the other hand, you have the Ultimate Aero. The Ultimate Aero also seems to be, as I said, this big American V8 twin-turbo dragster of a car in a very Venom GT kind of way that people like to think of as some rip-off of better cars. It isn't. It's a car that has an in-house engine, a 6.3-litre V8 that they built themselves. The visual appearance may not be the most original thing around, but I must say, even that actually grew on me over time. I kind of like the style, and that's actually coming from someone who has never liked the Lamborghini Diablo that much. And even their new vehicle, the Tuatara, which is now doing the rounds at various events and shows and tracks, I'm rooting for that car more so than I am for Hennessy's Venom F5 and the Jesko from Koenigsegg. I'm far more hoping that the Tuatara turns out to be the quickest of the three. It certainly has a ton of potential, and the car shows that they can most definitely do original-looking designs, because it's far more unique to them. The Ultimate Aero, though, has such a special place for me for those reasons, and also because the value for money, or specifically bang for buck, that car has is incredible. It's a car that you can literally pick up used for like $225,000. There was actually one for sale for that price. It wasn't a particularly good-looking version, it was blue with white down the centre, but still, the point is, for bang for buck, nothing comes close. Even something like an Ultima GTR or a Nissan GTR or whatever, they are still not as quick as the Ultimate Aero is, and it's not like it's some £2-3 million hypercar up in Bugatti and Koenigsegg and McLaren territory. It's not. It's nowhere near it. In fact, you're talking like, used Lamborghini money for something that can do 0 to 200 in like 14.5 seconds. It's insanely good bang for buck value. It's comfortable looking. I love the sound that it makes. I'm a sucker for V8 rumbles. And again, that's not really something you see all that often in the hypercar world. They tend to be these much more almost experimental engines like the 16-cylinder Bugatti, what McLaren's doing with their current vehicles like the Speedtail, and then you've got a couple of more brutish ones like the Hennessy and the SSC. But yeah, it's definitely a car that grew on me a lot over time. Now, before I get to the last two that I feel much more positive about, I want to first of all talk about the two negative ones, or at least not so much negative, but cars that I used to absolutely love, but maybe just really cooled off on over time. Now, the first one for me is very, very old school. It's the Audi TT Quattro, of all things, the original 1.8T Quattro from the late 90s, and the reason why this car is in this video is because this is, as far as I can remember, my first ever favourite car. When I was about 6 years old, playing Gran Turismo 2, there was just something about the car that I loved. The shape is like nothing else, almost like it should be similar to a Beetle, but at the same time it isn't. It's very much its own thing. At the time, we didn't have the oversaturation of TTs that we have now, where there's been so many different models, you see them all the time on the road, but there was just something that grabbed my attention about the car, and I loved it. To the point where it was, as I said, my favourite car. Now, it certainly isn't now, and that's why it's on the list. It dropped so much for me over time, to the point where I don't dislike it at all. I still think it's a very good car. Up until recently, it was one of the quickest cars I'd ever actually been in, the 3.2 Roadster in particular, the one that we have in Gran Turismo Sport actually, but the open-top version. But yeah, it's just a car that I cooled off on, basically. And, I was a 6-year-old kid, so I knew nothing about the cars that I would ultimately come to love. In fact, many of them didn't exist yet, which is funny to think of. But yeah, it was just a simple case of a childhood dream car that simply cooled off over time. The next one was actually much more recent, and this is one which might surprise some of you to be on the list, considering how highly I've spoken about the car and about the brand in general, and that is Tesla. The Tesla Model S in particular. Now, to be clear, I don't dislike Tesla. I don't dislike any of their cars. I like the original Roadster. I'm very excited to see what the new one can do. The Model X is interesting, the Model S. I'm definitely looking forward to their pickup truck. That might end up being my favourite one of all. But the Model S for me was the absolute champion flagship of what they could do. And it pretty much was the flagship until recently, where they've expanded the model lineup a little bit. And the P85 and the P90D in particular, before they gave it that facelift, which I'm not so much a fan of, it just seemed to me like genuinely the best car ever made. And I say that unironically, and you can even hear me talking about that fact in some of my older videos, and again, it was in my HSG Top 50, and to be honest, it probably still would be, but it would be so much lower on the list. It might even be like number 50 now, instead. Because I do still agree with a lot of the things that I said. It does have 7 seats, all-wheel drive, silent drive, fantastic economy and range for an electric car, incredible acceleration. It's just this brilliant all-round package for a lower price than something like an Aston Martin Rapide, where you've essentially got the most forward-thinking super saloon on the market, and I would still argue that all of those things are absolutely true. However, for me, it's more just a simple case that I've got bored of the car. I find Tesla's design style has kind of got boring to me over time. Now, that's nothing against the technology that they have. I would still love to drive one, of course. I love the technology inside of them. It's just that the car itself, I don't know, it kind of just, again, like the TT Quattro, it just waned a little bit for me, design-wise. In terms of the tech, it's still a fantastic vehicle, it's still one of the best cars ever made as far as I'm concerned, but it was just a simple case of like, oh yeah, the Tesla Model S. I wouldn't put it as like my top 5 dream cars anymore, whereas for quite a while I would have probably put it into that category, whereas now that you see more of them around, it's become a little bit more of a common thing. It's kind of like when you would first see somebody with an iPhone back in the day, it kind of meant more than it does now, which is great for business. It's cool for Tesla that it's actually become like that because it means that there are more of them around, but it just doesn't have quite the same magic to me that it used to have. So it's not that I hate or even dislike the car, it's still a remarkable machine across the board, and I stand by all the things that I said. It's just not one of my dream cars anymore. And now to get into the last 2 vehicles which I had more of a positive change with, another one from my list. In fact, the 2 remaining ones are both from my top 50 list. The first one, though, is the Sauvage Rival. This is a car which I kind of got really hot on for a while. I would talk about it a lot, really push it on the channel. It was featured in Unsung Heroes, I featured it in Drive Club, I featured it in the HSG Top 50, and I think it might have even been in my Gran Turismo 7 wishlist series as well. So it had quite a lot of coverage, plus in general conversation and comments with people on the channel. And again, I stand by a lot of this stuff, but originally I didn't like the Rival. Originally, it was a car that I just didn't like the design, and I saw it for the first time at Goodwood, and I can't remember what year it was, but it was parked in the supercar paddock, and it was the GTR version, I believe. That kind of track-focused one with the orange and grey paint and the big rear wing, which to me is kind of a pointless car, because that's not the purpose of the Revol. The whole point is how it blends practicality with performance, so the last thing it needs is a race version. It just makes no sense, but I saw it, I thought, oh yeah, some new supercar, I don't know what the name is, it doesn't look like the most original thing around, and I would still not say that the Revol is the prettiest thing around. It's a very Marmite-styled car. You either really like it or you probably really don't. But again, the reason why I love it so much is because I would argue that the Revol is actually one of the most unique supercars ever. Now, technically, as far as I'm aware, you can't buy one anymore. I don't think it exists. I mean, obviously the ones they built do, but I don't think the company is still around. But I believe there was some Japanese or Chinese, some Asian company, I think, who purchased the production rights to the car and turned it into a full electric exotic instead, which again, of course I love that. But of course, the original Sauvage version with that big, I believe, Corvette-sourced V8, 670 horsepower, similar performance in fact to a Ferrari FF, although with rear-wheel drive instead of all-wheel drive, there's just something about that original that has, of course, the purity. It sounds gorgeous. It has that lovely American-style rumble, and also the fact that it's so unique, as I said, on the market. You know, the FF is a very unique car, because usually shooting brakes tend to be of already established models, you know, the Aston Martin Rapide shooting brake, the Bentley shooting brakes, even the Ferrari 456 Venice, they're based on existing models. The FF was so unique because there was nothing else that it came from. It just burst onto the scene as its own thing, which I think is awesome. With the Revol, it's similar. There is nothing else quite like it. It is a 4-door, 4-seater, convertible supercar. And there is literally nothing else like that on the market. Now, that alone draws me to it immediately. The fact that it has one of the most complex but also beautiful folding roof systems you'll ever see, that gorgeous American power plant with the great sound instead of the much higher pitched Italian style audio that you usually have in an exotic. The performance is good. It has more of a focus on style and class and fun rather than just being the fastest thing around. Not that 205 miles per hour is exactly slow, but yeah, I love it. I love the Revol. Originally, though, wasn't a fan of the design at all. And to be honest, the design is probably my least liked thing about it still, but everything else more than makes up for that for me. It's such a unique car, such a unique experience looking at it, listening to it. Of course, sitting in it must be amazing as well, such a unique vehicle. And the last, but definitely not least one on the list, because of course with any top 10 or top 5 countdown of this type, you've got to end with something that's kind of an anticlimactic crescendo, so I'm ending the list with a Daihatsu. And that isn't a joke, because for those of you who know me, you know how much I love Daihatsu, and that is, unironically, Daihatsu's an amazing brand. They make fantastic little performance cars, especially in the K-car sector. There are 2 Daihatsus in particular that I've always loved, the Move SRXX and the original Storia or Syrian rally car, which was in Gran Turismo 2. Now, this is an interesting twist in the story, because the car that I'm talking about is not either of those. It's the Storia Cross 4, which again was featured in, as I said, my HSG Top 50 countdown. But here's the thing. I had no idea what that car could do. In fact, I didn't even know that the Cross 4 was a thing. I knew that the Storia rally car from Gran Turismo 2 was awesome because I used to love it. It had the wide body kit, the red and white paint, like 400 horsepower. It was crazy fast. One of the most undervalued cars from Gran Turismo 2 from many players. Everyone remembers stuff like the Escudo and the Cultus and the Espas and the Elise GT1. But then some of us remember the smaller ones, stuff which wasn't as obvious, like the Tigra ice race car or the Storia rally car. And to me, this one, it was such a little bruiser, but I had no idea that they'd ever built something that was even remotely similar to that. I thought that was kind of the point, that it was this crazy version that was so different, such an opposite to everything else that Daihatsu did, kind of like Suzuki as well, these amazing motorbikes, but kind of boring little cars, and then the amazing Escudo and the Cultus. I thought that that was just the same for Daihatsu, but then, around Gran Turismo 5 kind of time, so pretty recently really, I realised what the Cross 4 was. And prior to that, of course, it had still been in Gran Turismo, but I'd just seen it and never taken any notice of it at all. And of course, back in the day, that was understandable because I didn't used to cover gaming on YouTube. I didn't used to do car reviews on YouTube. The channel wasn't even a thing. And so I just wouldn't buy all the cars in the game. I would buy the ones that I wanted, obviously. So I would never buy these little white, boring-looking four-wheel drive Daihatsus. But that's the whole point. It's like the ultimate sleeper car from Daihatsu, because for those who don't know, the Daihatsu Storia Cross 4 is designed to be basically exactly that, the ultimate little sleeper. It's built to be a base model rally car. And what that means in practice is that Daihatsu builds the car that is essentially already stripped out and ready for performance to some degree, so that then some little privateer team can come along and buy it, slap their own livery on it, maybe tune it up a bit, and take it racing, or rallying in particular. And in Japan, this car was a force to be reckoned with. It was almost untouchable, in fact, in the under 1 litre category, if I recall correctly, because it's only got a 713cc engine, which is not that much bigger than a K car anyway, but it puts out about 120 horsepower from the factory thanks to a turbo, and it shifts. It's actually quicker than the vast majority of European hot hatches. 0 to 60 is something like 7.5 seconds, which is almost in Honda Integra territory. That's crazy for a car that is just 120 horsepower of buzzing, peanut-style energy. As I've said before, it is essentially like a turbocharged peanut. It's this tiny little white thing with all-wheel drive, looks like a senior citizen's car, because essentially it is the base model, but this one is nuts, absolutely nuts, and it's not so much a case of going from hating it to loving it, it's going from not even acknowledging its existence to loving it, because I never knew what I was missing, and that is why it's such an awesome little car. You can still experience it in Gran Turismo 6. Of course, I hope that they bring it back, but I don't see it happening anytime soon, because it's not exactly the kind of car that a lot of people in the community are clamoring for. It tends to be more of a cult favourite for people like myself and others who know what it is and realise just how good it is, because what a monster. It really is an absolute little monster of a car. So that's it for my 6. Couple of positives, couple of not so positives, so I'd love to hear about yours down below. And of course, don't forget to click on that SoundCloud link to check out the audio-only side of things for those of you who enjoy podcasts. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.